Okay, well, I can see that folks are still coming into the room, but I'm going to go ahead and just start with introductions so that we can get the event going. Welcome, everybody. My name is Liberty, and I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective. We're a 16-year-old queer and trans run bookstore in Southern Appalachia. And this evening, we're joined by contributors to Death in the Mouth Volume 2, a horror anthology showcasing BIPOC and other ethnically marginalized writers and artists from around the world. And we really do have an incredible group of folks here tonight to chat. I think this might be the widest range of time zones on any event that we've ever done before. So maybe as folks introduce themselves later, you can share what time zone you're in. But right now for me, it's 7 p.m. and it's pretty dark outside, kind of chilly. But I'm pleased to be in a cozy spot, getting ready to hear some truly horrifying stories. So let's see, just a little bit of background about our bookstore. We are in Southern Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee people, and we are continuing to do some events virtually, like this one tonight, both because it provides a really awesome opportunity to connect with people across distances and borders, and also because we know that there's still a lot of folks in our community for whom in-person events have a lot of barriers related to health and COVID and things like that. So in the next few weeks, we are going to be hosting several other events, including conversations on prison abolition, the West Virginia mine wars, and the history of Jewish anarchism. So we got a range of topics. Hope you'll tune in for those, and I'll put a link in the chat if you're interested in finding more information. So we are using Zoom's webinar today as a platform. There's an open chat, which you're welcome to use. We would love to hear from you throughout the conversation. And there's also a Q&A tool. If you've got questions for the panelists, it would be great to put those in the Q&A tool where it'll be easy to keep track of them. They won't get buried. And we'll do our best to circle around to those questions at the end of the event. So we're going to get started here. We've got a great panel. First up, Cassie Hart, who sort of helped to pull this all together today. Cassie is a stalwart badass science fiction and fantasy writer, collaborator, active daydreamer, Maori and Pakeha. She has too many ideas and not enough time to write them all, and she's doing her best. Cassie, thanks so much for making this space possible tonight.
If I have again, I'm so pleased to be here. I'm in New Zealand, by the way, it's daylight savings time, 1:05 p.m. and it's way too muggy for my liking, but I don't have any aircon on because it's too loud. So I'm just going to spit it out over here.
Wow, sacrificing for the good of us all. Thank you, Cassie. We've also got Riot Bones, who's a queer Filipino illustrator and comic artist who does incredible work. Bones has a passion for men, monsters, and everything in between. Thank you so much for being here, Bones.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am also based in the UK right now, by the way, so it is midnight and it is extremely cold, so yeah.
You gotta do a little temperature share here with our range.
Oh,
Oh yeah, thank you for holding
oh
that
yeah,
up,
that's
Cassie.
my work. It's currently 0 degrees right now.
Wow.
And there was a forecast for snow recently, which I hope isn't gonna happen because I am not built for this weather.
Cool. Well, next up we've got Kang Romanus, who is a writer of short speculative fiction, often with a twist of horror. His stories are about living at the intersection of being a gay, disabled, mixed Asian American, and his most recent anthology is Dudes Rock, a collection of speculative fiction celebrating queer masculinity. So glad you're here, Jay.
So happy to be here. I am also, it is also 7 p.m. for me. Very cold, very snowy, and rainy, so everything's slippery. Um, And as a fun fact, Dudes Rock is available for purchase from Firestorm, so that's pretty cool.
It's true, one of our newest titles, so people can check that out from us. Yeah, thank you, Jay. Um, we've also got Xavier Garcia, who's a writer and editor from Toronto, Canada. His short fiction has appeared in various magazines and anthologies published by Fugitives and Futurists, Cold Signal, Hex, Apocalypse Confidential, Cursed Morsels, and Filthy Loot. So glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's also 7 p.m. I'm in Canada. We had like a major snowstorm today, so I've not left the house except to walk my Chihuahua, and he didn't enjoy it, and I didn't enjoy it.
Oh, I wish your Chihuahua was on the call. All right. And last but absolutely not least, we've got Cassiopeia Gatmaitan, who is a queer fiction writer and poet from the Philippines. Their works appeared in Uncharted magazine, The Lover's Literary Journal, Londomir Literary Magazine, and elsewhere. Their works engage with hauntings and the haunted, folklore and history, the Gothic and the grotesque, and the anti-colonial. And when not writing, they can be found tending to their garden of tropical orchids. I got so close to getting through all the bios without messing them up. The last word. Thank you so much for being here, Cassiopeia.
Hello, so excited to be here. Okay, so time zone reveal. I am GM. My time zone is GMT +08, and it's currently 8 a.m. here, and it's extremely hot. Not even gonna lie. I'm like, whew.
Well, thanks everybody for being here across all these amazing time zones. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Cassie to get us started.
You're doing such a great job. I actually forgot that I was in charge. So thank you for the welcome, and thank you to everyone who is here now or who may be watching this in the future. We are so excited that you could come along to help us launch Death in the Volume 2, which is absolutely beautiful. If you haven't picked up a copy yet, it is well worth getting. Completely biased as one of the two editors. How could I not be? So we have an awesome group of people here to talk about both their stories and art as well, and horror in general. Sloane would love to have been here, but she's not feeling very well today. Also, Jen had to pull out because she's sick as well. Lots going around at the moment, all over the world, I swear. We're going to kick things off with some readings, and we're going to start with, who are we starting with? I closed my piece of paper. You, Xavier. Yeah, excellent. So just fun fact before we get started. This is one of the first stories that we accepted. It may have even been the first story we accepted for the anthology. And as soon as it came in, Sloane sent me a message and was like, Cassie, go and read this now. And I was like, go and read it. I was like, oh my God, yes. So it was a very quick turnaround on getting this one locked in for the anthology. Anyway, take it away.
Appreciate hearing that. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I wrote a story. It is called An Ode to the Minor Arcana in a Triplet Flow. And I'll start reading it now. Blood on gold teeth looks dope as fuck. Trey feels bad thinking that. Feels bad that that's where his mind goes as his fist comes down again on the man's face. The brittle crunch of broken nose bones, barely audible beneath a boombox blaring some Memphis rap group's new album. Sound cranked to drown out any screams. The man's labored breathing somehow keeping time with the music's barren snares and coked up hi-hats. Trey collects himself, panting and ignoring the ache in his fist as he watches blood bubble and gush from the man's nose to run over his mouth and teeth. Hell, blood on gold teeth does look dope as fuck, though. You'll have to keep that in mind for when he finally films his first music video. I mean, like, goddamn, it's 92. People expect violence in videos, demand it even. But again, Trey feels bad thinking this, feels bad indulging in these selfish thoughts as he deals out so much pain to an absolute stranger. But he has to, or else he'll vomit from the guilt. Because seeing violence in videos is one thing, and choosing to actively hurt a man until he's broken and bleeding is another. And Trey doesn't want to think about what making that choice means about the kind of person it makes him. I want it, I need it, I'll take it, it's mine. I want it, I need it, I'll take it, it's mine. Another punch to the kidney and the room suddenly sounds like piss. Trey isn't a violent person, he's an artist. But come on now, this right here, As much as he hates it, as much as it makes him sick, it's necessary. Trey can perform at all the local shows he wants to and rap his ass off better than any other local fuck with a mic, but without funding, without money to pay for studio time and producers and radio spots and who knows what the hell else. Everything the hell else, really. Hype and talent mean nothing. Trey throws another punch to the side, and this time something breaks. The man coughs up blood all over his piss-stained pants. Trey knows what hard work pays off to in this country. Cuban on his father's side, Haitian on his mother's, so growing up, his dad used to say things like hard work was in his blood. But that never felt like a compliment. Like when folks say people from Latin America and the Caribbean are just so hardworking. Oh, really? That's so nice. You really think so? Actually, please go suck a dick. Those are such obvious lines to get black and brown immigrants doing the work that white people don't want to. Sort of like telling your little brother that he's the best at making PB&Js just so that he'll make one for you while you keep on playing video games. So when his mother's brother came to him with an idea on how to get some funding for his music, how can he not pay attention? Go see Papa Wilkie's uncle says. The man's got eyes and fingers everywhere. And Trey knows what that means, has heard his name around. A local Haitian businessman everyone seems to do business with, no matter what it is. And yeah, sure, business. Business like dope, guns, girls. Business like anything like, even weird shit like Santeria, voodoo, and brujeria, and whatever, anything's clever, as long as the man is willing to fund his music. So Trey goes to this dusty ass strip club around the way. Papa Wilkie, by reputation, has offices all over the city, some that were even nice. So who the hell can say why he chosen the ladies of Babylon as a meeting spot? Strip clubs and titties on a Friday night are one thing. It's just straight up off-putting when you're there to talk about the one thing that's the only thing you do want to talk about. But what choice does he have? So Trey goes and opens the door to a blast of pink and purple neon, to the steady pounding of over-modulated 808 screaming distortion over a soundscape so raw it's just as much noise as it is music. Bass so aggressive it physically hurts, with them hi-hats ticking away alongside a voice from one of them 666 boys, discordantly low and melodic and sing-songing murder raps in a Memphis triplet flow. I want it, I need it, I'll take it, it's mine. I want it, I need it, I'll take it, it's mine. Thank you so much.
It was so great hearing it straight from you. Thank you so much. Oh, fantastic. Okay. Oh, hard act to follow, I reckon. How you feeling, Jay?
I actually forgot that I was going next, so
Oh,
and now
okay.
now I'm nervous. I wasn't nervous before. Um,
You'll be amazing, and everyone is going to be thrilled to hear your words from your mouth. So take it
Thank
away.
you. I'm going to read from the physical copy because I also really love the physical copy. It's very gorgeous. All right, this story is called A Rising Tide Brings Sirens to the Shore. He came from the water, dripping seaweed and caked in barnacles like a lobster trap. My father saw him first. I was finishing up the knots tying our boat to the dock when I heard him shout in surprise. By the time I turned around, the stranger was already stepping onto dry land, and I remember now how the setting sun's red light made it look like he was shedding blood onto the rocks instead of seawater. I scrambled off the boat and down the dock towards him, my young imagination already sparked. Nothing new ever came to our little island, and I wanted to stake my claim on this surprise before any of the few other children in town could. I heard the planks creak behind me as my father skipped over his last checks on the boat to catch up to me. Good evening. Do you need help? My father said to the stranger politely as he grabbed my hand. I could feel it shaking in my grasp, but his voice was steady. The stranger didn't reply, just inclined his head and continued up the pebbled slide that led from the dock into town. He was barefoot, and I winced sympathetically as he made his way over the sharp shale and gravel at first. But I didn't know what had kept him alive under the ocean, and decided pragmatically that rocks probably weren't too much for him to handle if the entire force of the northern Atlantic wasn't either. The waves slapped against the dock supports loudly. My father looked at the choppy waters and then back at the stranger wandering up towards town. The people of Hollows Island knew the sea. We knew lobsters, sturgeon, salmon, and mackerel. We had learned to live in the face of its wrath and thank it for all it gave us. We loved it when the salt breeze brushed over the hardy sweet roses that grew in clumps all along the coastal cliffs, and feared it when nor'easters tore away shingles and tossed our boats against each other. We knew the sea, but we knew nothing about strange men appearing from it, clothed in shell like an oyster. I could see in my father's eyes that he was just as confused as me, and my heart beat faster with a heady exhilaration, even through my mild disappointment that this creature of the deep seemed intent on heading into the town I'd already spent all my life in. By the time my father got back to town, it was fully night. There was barely anyone else out. This close to winter, no fishermen wanted to stay out late, and everyone stuck on this tiny wedge of rock off the coast of Maine was a fisherman, so the streets were mostly empty. I could feel more than see my father at the bar farther up Main Street a longing glance, but we could have warmth and music at home as well as there, and he never brought me around other men if he could help it. We headed home instead. I didn't mind. I was tired, and there was salt in my hair, and my hands were raw from pulling nets. My thighs were already burning as we climbed the slanting streets toward home, and I took deep breaths of the pine-scented air. Back then, I was used to the smell of the sea. I never noticed it, though I think I would cry if I caught a whiff now. But the pine trees only grew higher up the island, and since our house was one of the furthest uphill, I always looked forward to their sweet smell as a sign of bedtime. Holos Island is shaped like a wedge. I'll stop referring to it in the past tense because it's still there, against all odds. The side facing the mainland is the widest, and that's where it slopes gently into the sea. Our piers, dry dock, and packing plant are all on that side, below the town and halfway in the water. From that area, the island rises and narrows at the same time. The highest point is the farthest from the mainland, and a pointed cliff drops from there directly into the water like the prow of a ship, presenting a forbidding face to the outer ocean. The town perches across the middle of the island, slanted right along the slope. Main Street runs down the center from the church at the highest point of town straight through the main pier. Above the church is nothing but thick pine forest and granite bones poking through the island's dirt skin, and a clearing right above the sheer cliff drop at the top where nothing grows but scrub grasses around a slab of black stone. None of us ever went up there, and I certainly wasn't thinking about it when my father opened the door to our house that night. I had no reason to. Peter, honey, you're back late, I heard my mother say in a trembling voice, almost at the same moment as I registered the stranger from the sea, crouching by our wood stove and warming his hands. I felt an unpleasant jolt at the sight. Surrounded by the wildness of sea and sky, the stranger had promised adventure. He looked like an exciting deviation from the endless routine of catching fish and attending church and braiding nets, but that deviation wasn't supposed to follow me home. He wasn't supposed to drip seawater onto the sawed planks of our kitchen floor while still clothed in nothing but ocean detritus. To me, he looked like nothing more than the underside of an old boat, crusted and weathered, and that should have been funny. But the wrongness of his presence in the soft light of the stove was a sharp pain in my chest, sharp enough to make me swallow and grab my father's hand again, afraid of nothing I could put a word to. There's a
Thank
lot
you so
more
much.
afterwards.
Yeah, there is a heap more. I think one of the things I love about this story is it takes all of my favorite isolation island weather sea kind of horror stuff and puts it into like a short story, and you do it so well. It's fantastic. Yeah,
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much for sharing. Yeah, obviously I love everyone's feelings, which is why you're all in the book. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Are you ready to share with us now, Cassiopeia? Yeah, cool. Take it away.
Hello, so I'll be reading from my story Maiden Monster Muse, and let's get started. This one he devours. When he presses his mouth to her still living flesh, it feels right. Her skin is warm against his lips, her heart beating so fast that it flushes her whole body hot. She screams when he takes his first bite, but the sound fades like the thunder of carriages out in the street below. He cradles her head, hushing her, wondering why he'd never thought to have her like this before, slick and yielding, limbs bound so tight that she can hardly struggle. She isn't pretty, this one. He doesn't know what went wrong. All the parts look right, but she doesn't have the allure of the most recent body or the subtle perfection of the one before that. She wasn't any good as a model, and she never would be, so he decided to use her to sate one of his darker curiosities instead. He glides his lips down to her waist, savoring her involuntary shudder. He enjoys the way her whimpers sound like those made in the throes of pleasure, enjoys her single long keen when he sinks his teeth just beneath the skin and pulls. One of her hands slips from its bindings, and she grips a fistful of his hair. It's amusing to him that even now she tries to fight back. He brushes her hand away before striking her across the face. She flinches, spitting out blood from a bitten tongue. The drops blossom all along the white linen sheets, vibrant as watercolor roses. Usually he doesn't hit her. He isn't that sort of man. But this time, he can't help himself. She's such an unruly little thing, and God knows she could benefit from some discipline. He swallows and moves to take another bite, but pauses. It would be nice to sample all the softest parts of her, but he's worried about tearing into something unpleasant, like her stomach or a bit of intestine. He sighs. Her entire body slackens when he pulls away from her eyes filling with tears. She's such a stupid, emotional creature, and he savors the way she screams when he digs his fingers into one of her wounds in reproach. He's not sure whether he'll be able to use any parts from this one, what with the mess he's left. Careless. It's a shame since she's so well made, all of her seems invisible. He's getting better at this, bit by bit. If she dies from her wounds, he'll forge a new body for her, and she'll return to him, hale and whole, a wife with which to share his home and his bed, a bride fit to honor and serve and obey him. Perhaps he won't even give her a tongue this time. It's not as though she'll need it to model for him, and he'd much prefer the silence. She looks at him then, and he's unsettled by the reproach in her gaze, burst capillaries spilling red into her sclerae, leaving no whites between the blood and her midnight dark irises. His disquiet eventually gives way to pity, his poor little muse, now beautiful by virtue of being ruined. She can barely even scream without choking on the sound. He touches her cheek, a fond gesture, all the while avoiding the sight of her wounds. The ragged, ugly things, bits of serrated fat and muscle bearing the bone beneath. He turns away from her and stands, unable to fathom the sight of them for long. Just as he prepares to leave, a shadow obscures his periphery, shifting closer to the bed, looming over the body. He pauses. She's early. When he turns, the figure of the veiled woman comes into view, her eyes caved from their sockets and her skin wrought gray beneath the lace of her mantilla. He grins, showing her his blood-stained teeth, and he watches as her tears begin to fall, dark and thick and red. She's always been a bit of a voyeur, so entranced by the pain he causes her bodies, she has no shame. You're getting impatient, he says, stroking her cheek through the lace. This one isn't even cold yet. She flinches away from him, drawing her empty gaze down to the body, its chest still rising and falling. She'd been the first, so long ago, this ghost. He'd picked her up off the streets, given her a home, as well as a place in his workshop as a model. Those were the years right after the Great War, when swaths of shell-shocked soldiers, himself among them, flocked to these shores for some hope of solace. The continent's troubles sat leagues away from here, and indeed, the war's bloodied, rotting fingers hadn't so much grazed this country. It had been a safe haven, made sweeter by his meeting her. If it bothers you, my darling, why do you stay? He asks the ghost, bunching the lace of her mantilla and using it to wipe the blood running down her cheeks. She gives him no answer. She'd always been like this, holding fast to her silent indignation. It's one of the things that had infuriated him most about her. He leans closer, lips hovering next to her ear. Are you here to watch? She snarls at him. He grabs her chin hard enough to make her wince. Don't go yet, my love, he taunts, shoving her away when her blood begins to drip down his fingers. This is your favorite part, he says. Over the years, he's come to suspect that she likes it, lingering as the bodies die. It must be like seeing the carcass of a hunted animal, bones still red with gore. A hard sight made beautiful by its ability to draw the eye. He casts his gaze from her to the body on the bed, whose eyes are wide with fear as she watches him speak to something she can't see. Her breathing is fast but steady, a constant swell and release. It will take her a while to die. More's the pity. He has work to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So visceral, like your descriptions. And honestly, every time I read that story, I felt so tense inside me, and listening to you was even more powerful. Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, awesome. Right. Okay. Well, I feel like I need to cool off after that. There was a lot of intensity and power in those words. So thank you again for sharing them with us. Let's kick off into some discussion. I realize that I put like some of the questions in a weird order, so my bad. Let's start because we had your readings. It would be great to hear from you guys a little bit of what you wanted to explore with these stories, and for you, Bones, and maybe we'll start with you because you have had a chance to, have a reading. Yeah, you have an art. How do you start the process of creating that art based on a story? Because you're basically just like sent a story and said, do you want to do this, the art for this one? And that was where you began. So do you want to share with us how you started that whole process of creating the art that you did for Sasha's story?
Right. So I used to work for like a student paper back in uni, and I worked as an illustrator, so I'm kind of used to like, reading an article and thinking about how to visualize it. But this one was like working with fiction that was like pretty different, I think. And for this one, what I wanted to, instead of like going for a particular scene, what I ended up doing is like kind of focusing on what the story felt like to me personally, like and like what the experience of reading it was like. So for me, the story kind of felt like a slow spiral with Kotare in the middle of everything. And it's like, and that's how I usually work with like more emotive pieces, where I focus on what the feeling is and trying to show what it feels like visually. Because, at the end of the day, like you always have like inherent limitations with illustrations compared to writing, and then it goes both ways, but so yeah, I focused on creating that spiral, and that became the foundation of the composition of the piece. And with Kotare in the middle and everything kind of like being engulfed by the water and the ruin because of what happens in the story. So yeah. So yeah, there's the spiral with the eel skeleton and stuff.
I think you did a beautiful job. I know Sasha, obviously New Zealand's a tiny place, and we're both Kaitahu Māori. So I really love the way you brought it together, and spirals are quite often used in Māori patterns, which is really cool as well. I think you did a beautiful job. It must be quite challenging to do, but I think like everyone in the book has done such an amazing job with pairing art to the story, and I think pulling out the vibes is definitely a great way to go. Sloan
Yeah,
says,
honestly, the biggest challenge for me was kind of just giving justice to how good the story was. It was amazing. I read it like over and over again, and I was like, how am I gonna draw for this?
did a phenomenal job of it for sure.
Thank you.
Sloan said that seeing how all the artists interpret the different stories and elements is the best part of making a collection like this. It's so cool to get that pairing of art and story. And I think for writers, because I'm a writer too, seeing someone interpret that art, interpret your story as art is pretty phenomenal. Do you want to share how that felt for you guys?
Yeah, it was for me. It was a wild experience. It was like I'd never had artwork created for one of my pieces before. So it's just like it was like you guys were like, oh, we're gonna get you an artist that's gonna work on your piece. I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. I don't know what I was expecting, and then you sent the piece. Um, by Cho Hyun Kim, and I was just like floored. Like I think I like instantly sent it to my mom, instantly like sent it to my girlfriend. I was just like, everyone's got to look at this. I was just like breaking apart the little pieces. That was like, that's from that scene. That's from that scene. Yeah, it was wild because it was I never pictured my story like that, but then the artists kind of did their own thing, and I could see where they were taking from, and I can see like it was like seeing my story through the eyes of someone else, kind of, if that makes sense. But I was floored.
Yeah, for those watching at home, the authors and the artists don't actually communicate with each other. So there's not really back and forth with them. It's all with Sloan. So I think it's always when you see the art, it's kind of like, here's the piece. So yeah, does anyone else want to share how that was for them?
Well, as someone who I got my start writing in fandom spaces, it the fan art is such like a big part of fandom spaces and like fan art for popular fan fiction. And just coming from that, I have always felt that the idea of moving someone enough with my work to for them to create art is such a fantastic idea. Um, and so I was really excited to see what would come out of someone creating art from my own art. And I really appreciated that Woof made sure to make it sexy. That was important to me, given my story, and I was not disappointed.
You have anything else you wanted to add, Cassiopeia?
I was honestly so excited when I learned that each story would have an accompanying illustration because it was also my first time having because this was my first short story published in anything. So it was my first time having a piece with like an art accompaniment. And I was just so stunned at how accurately the artist Shinua Chen managed to capture the image in my head. I don't know if you guys can see my phone, but like here's the accompanying art of my story. And yeah, basically, I felt that the artist just reached into my brain and grabbed the image straight from there. So yeah, I really loved this process.
I think part of that it like speaks to the testament of your story writing, that it evokes such a clear connection with the artist that they can draw something, create something that that kind of adds to what you were working with your story. So that's awesome. I had something to say and then it disappeared. This is how my brain is. It's now 1:30 and I've been up for 10 hours and my brain's tired. So apologies if I stuff things up. Yeah, no, I think it's oh, that's what I was going to say actually, is that one of the things that Sloan and I love to do is hold space for writers who haven't had a sale or pro sale to be a part of our project. It's really important for us to kind of support newer writers. So often in your traditional best ofs or other things, you just see the same names over and over again. And I think it's so important to lift up new voices and make sure that we're keeping our eyes open for new people and new work. So yeah, we really appreciate being able to do that. Yeah, so thank you. What were some of the things that you guys wanted to explore with these stories? I think they're quite they're all evocative, and people who've watched so far have had a sample of that. But if you want to expand on some of the themes and ideas that you're working with, because we kind of don't have a specific like write a story, it has to be horror about this or that. It's kind of like a just give us your what you want to write that you think fits within our scope. Anyone jump in? It's all good.
Yeah, I can go. For me, it was like, I was seeing so many submission calls for like, you see them every year. It's like people would be like, write us a heavy metal horror story, and heavy metal and horror go so hand in hand. And sometimes you'll see punk too. And I like punk and I like metal, but I'm much more of a hip hop fan. So I was kind of like, I'm gonna set out to write a hip hop horror story. Um, Because I was like, it exists, like horror in hip hop. It's not something that there is overlap. Specifically, like three. I'm always like, this is a 3 6 Mafia love letter. It's not, but it kind of is like 3 6 Mafia. It's in the title, 3 6 666. Like one of the members, Gangsta Boo, right? She calls herself the Devil's Daughter, and I love that. It's like it's hip hop and it's horror. So that was kind of how I started. It was just kind of that nugget of the idea where I'm gonna kind of write hip hop and horror. But as I was working with it, I started thinking about hip hop more deeply and how it what it means to me, I guess, because I didn't like to say that like I grew up with hip hop. Like I kind of grew up in it. Like I love it. It's so much a part of my life. Like I have an uncle who was a rapper back in the day. Like I remember yeah, like 3 6 Mafia is awesome. I remember like distinct formative memories of kind of like being with my uncles for the first time, and it's just like oh, none of my cousins are here, my mom's not here, and finally being able to just chill with my uncles, and they're putting on Ice Cube and Wu-Tang Clan, and I'll love hip hop for the rest of my life. I'll love it till the day I die. But as you get older with this art form, I think um, you get like you get a little bit more nuanced eyes to it. And I think a lot of hip hop, the lyrics are very they're very uplifting. I think they champion a lot of black and brown voices. I think they've given black and brown creatives a platform since before even the 80s, like even like late 70s. And I think it started off as almost like a protest, like protest music. And I think what it does for black and brown people, I think is amazing. But then you also have rappers that kind of champion these capitalistic systems, these same capitalistic systems that are actually detrimental to black and brown communities and actually detrimental to countries which have predominantly black and brown citizens. And there's a contradiction there. That on one hand it's championing people, on the other hand it's kind of promoting ideas and themes that are detrimental to that people. And I don't necessarily think I'm the person to kind of like judge it or wag my finger at it. And that's not what I'm doing at all. That's not what I want to do. But for me, it was kind of like I love this art form. I'm gonna love this art form for the day I die. I want to write something that celebrates it and loves it, but in a way where I'm not. I love it because of those contradictions and not despite of those contradictions. I love it for how messy it is because black and brown people aren't a monolith. We all, we don't all just kind of believe in this one kind of credo or anything like that. So I loved it for that, and I think that's what I was trying to capture in the story. Which is like there's a lot there. There's a lot there about how difficult it is being the child of immigrants, of wanting a better life, but also the allure of the better life it can be a little bit dangerous. And that's kind of what I was trying to capture in the story while I was writing it.
I think you did a beautiful job with that, for sure. It really, yeah,
Thank
very evocative. Yeah, it was so good. Can't wait to read more things by you in the future.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Who wants to go next?
Is it okay if I do?
Yeah, go for it.
So initially, I wanted to explore the horrors of American colonialism with this story, but like in a really subtle way because it's not something that many people are familiar with in the context of the Philippines. Um, and also I wanted to explore the richness of like the setting of the Gilded Age art scene here in the Philippines. And primarily I'm a historical fiction author, so this was quite like the experience for me. It was really fun navigating through like the horror tropes, like what do I do here, what new things can I add to enrich my story. And basically I wanted to explore more local horror tropes because I feel like that's something I grew up with, but that's not something that the world has seen much of yet. And it's just something very, very close to my heart because I grew up with those stories and like I learned to write through analyzing them. Like when I was young, there was a series of best Philippine horror stories by this local publisher. And that's basically what I cut my teeth on as a very young writer. So yeah, I wanted to explore um, the horrors of what was done to us by the colonizers, but also I wanted to explore the beauty of our settings, our history, our art, and that's what gave rise to the story.
That's so cool. I think that's one of the awesome things about this collection is such a range of people from different backgrounds and different cultures, and it's always so what like there's two different things. One is it's awesome to see the variety, but it's also really cool to see the connections between different cultures that you might not have seen before. As a Māori author, sometimes I feel like something's just ours, and then I read other stories and I'm like, oh, I can see that in other cultures, and it kind of helps to helps you understand other cultures while also finding connections with them as well. Yeah, it's really, really cool. I think that's so cool. They had a Philippines horror collection. Like, that's awesome. I wish we'd had something like that, but not here in New Zealand. No. Jay, do you want to tell us about what you wanted to explore with your story?
Yeah, so the core nugget that my story started from was just a very simple idea that I wanted to write a story about a queer person who was unequivocally a bad person. And I wanted, because I feel like a lot of space is given in media for complicated straight people. Um, and their straightness is very often a facet of why they're complicated. It's like a man who does good for the country, but he's bad to the women in his life. And I feel like that is very common, and the fact that it's an aspect of their sexuality is never really explored at all. So I thought it would be both interesting, um, and just praxis in a way to explore that. And also, I just really I'm not a fan of the more sanitized gay media that is the only media that is allowed to exist in the mainstream. So I don't think I have to name names. Um, and yeah, so that was like where it started for me, and then I thought that to make this character, still complex, like a bad person, yes, but still have the audience have sympathy for them, it would be a lot easier to tell the story through a viewpoint character who wasn't that central figure, and sort of like explore the sympathy that that character has for this central figure. Um, and that was just sort of how I got to the structure of the story. And then lastly, with the setting, like you were saying, Cassie, with the whole like island horror, sea and ocean, it's all about, being isolated and feeling wild emotions. That's what runs through like the vast majority of sea-based horror, I feel like. And so I was like, oh, that's perfect. Queer people are very isolated. We feel very isolated, and yet our emotions are no less strong than anyone else's. And that taken to an extreme, a horror extreme, that could drive a lot of really wild actions. And also, I just watched Midnight Mass, so I was very much feeling the whole like island horror vibe. So it just all came together at the right time.
Yeah, it definitely did. I do love a good island horror or coastal horror or isolated horror. My kids get really annoyed because like, oh, I want to read something, and I go to my bookshelf and I try to find them a book. I'm like, island, no. House, no. I'm like, I like the kind of claustrophobic spaces, even when they're in nature. No, we don't like any of your horror. I'm like, shh, are you even my children?
There's a reason they're all classic settings.
Yeah, super fun to explore. Yeah, no, that's awesome. What would you say, carrying on from that, is all of you two bones, what would be some of your like early experiences with the horror genre that kind of contributed to who you are as creators? Anyone, feel free to jump
Can I speak? So, I guess my experience with horror, well, this is like more like in terms of like looking back at things retrospectively, because this is something my partners actually pointed out to me. But he pointed out when we watch stuff, he said that, I always have a tendency to kind of like take the unintended perspective in different stories. And looking back now, I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense why I love horror then, because um my favorite thing to think about in horror is the idea of monstrosity and kind of like deconstructing and interrogating it, and like who our monsters are and why they're monsters. Are they monsters to begin with? And actually, during my undergrad thesis, I worked on a like little zine thing that talks about Filipino horror. But it was a critique of a lot of things. And it basically traces back the like a lot of the tropes that we have. I kind of trace them back to like a lot of colonial influences from when the Spanish and then the Americans colonized us. And there was a lot of like crazy stuff going on. Like in the 60s, the CIA actually like created like fake vampire attacks in rural areas of the Philippines. Yeah, that was insane. Basically what they would do is they would kidnap rebels and puncture their necks and drain them of blood and kind of spread them around rural villages and mountains to like deter villagers from supporting these rebels. So that was like, well, that was insane to read, and not a lot of people know about that. So yeah, basically coming from, somebody in the margins, and like I have a lot of family history linked to like the insurgency that happened in the Philippines, that is still happening in the Philippines. I kind of want to reframe things And I feel like moving forward, there should be a rethinking of monstrosity, and that's what I want to do with my work.
It's so cool. Definitely have to keep an eye out on what you're doing.
And just to jump off on that, I feel like oh, by the way, I read Bones's Neophobia. That's what that was, right? And
Yeah, it
I
was.
loved it. I loved it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to jump off on that, I feel like Filipino culture is one that's very traditionally steeped in folklore, and a lot of that has horror elements because basically a lot of what the Spaniards did in essentially crushing our native religions was that they pushed it to the sidelines and allowed like monstrosity, like these metaphors for horror to take root. Basically, they marginalized us to the point that our ancestral religions, our ancestral beliefs turned into horror stories. But I still feel like there's a sense of sacredness there in that horror. Like these stories are still ours, just in a different form nowadays. And I grew up hearing all of those stories, and they really influenced me as a writer and also like just as a person. I feel like those beliefs are still at my core. And also, it just speaks through my writing a lot, I feel. Um, and also, wait, my train of thought got cut off. Oh no.
It'll
Yeah.
come.
Basically, I also had a lot of paranormal experiences when I was younger. Like when I was younger, I lived in a haunted house, and I feel like that also contributed a lot to like my writing. And I was also, because I live in the province, I was also apprenticed to a witch doctor for a while, and that was also a very um formative experience for me because I learned all these traditional remedies, all these traditional cures to stuff that like yeah, that like plague Filipinos and like our society basically. And it was very cool. Like I learned a lot, and nowadays I can like share those experiences through my writing, and I really really love that.
I love how grounded in your culture this all is, both of you. It's so cool. Although obviously quite horrific what the colonizers have done. But I think it's always exciting when you can claim that back as your own and reinvent it, reinterpret it, and use it for powerful words and images to keep your people moving forward, keep your culture growing. Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, kind of jealous actually. Our culture is still quite suppressed. We're still reclaiming a whole lot of things, so maybe my kids will have more of those fun experiences. Or they do. Yeah, go Jay, jump in.
Sorry, I was just cheering for your children
I
having
thought you
those
were.
experiences. But
We can we can live in hope. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean honestly, uh I would say I came to horror pretty recently, to be honest. I was like a huge scaredy cat as a kid. But like I said, I got my when I really started thinking about writing when I was participating in fandoms. So I would have to admit that my first real exposure to horror was through the television show. It was Supernatural. But I honestly don't think, I mean, I am not ashamed of it because I feel like Supernatural really, they did their homework in terms of like, uh, displaying a lot of like classic horror homages and references, and they really work it into the structure of the show in a lot of interesting ways. So in terms of like for someone who came later to horror, it was a very effective crash course into the genre. But what really made me fall in love with it as like a genre on its own, outside of just one single TV show that I happened to enjoy, was Alien. I watched Alien and just it opened my mind to both the fact that horror could be so incredibly meshed with my first love of fantasy and sci-fi, and to be used as a tool to enhance both genres at the same time. And then also that watching Alien made me feel like all these like wild emotions that I was having could be more effectively communicated through horror. So it was a very personal thing. But honestly, the way it's ended up like representing in my work, I feel like has leaned more towards just the fact that I grew up in a Catholic family. I feel like I've realized all my most of my horror stories are about like transformation or rituals in some way, and those, you know, going to mass every Sunday, that's just one big ritual, and it centers around the transformation of bread and wine into literal flesh and blood that you then consume, which hearing that and truly believing that as a child really it makes sense that it leaves a mark. So um yeah, that's really those all are what have come together and formed my experience of the genre.
It is fabulous. I think I always think the best horror has those personal connections anyway. So it's always, and I think the ways we find horror can be so diverse across the world. But there's, like you said, there's supernatural. There's these things that all cultures can connect to, whether whoever creates them. In this case, super successful Hollywood show. But it doesn't diminish what it was and what it did, or how it got people into thinking about these things in ways that they may not have before. So
I
yeah.
absolutely agree, and I'm very grateful to the show for that.
First off, shout out Jay because Supernatural gets a bad rap. That show was so good. I have the first few seasons on DVD. Like, I'll defend that show till I die. It's so good.
1 to 5 are extremely high quality.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. I don't think I saw past like 6, 7, maybe. But yeah, those first few seasons are nuts. Uh, yeah, I got into horror in kind of like a weird way, a little bit. I don't want to say late. Like, basically, when I was a kid, I still think that the oral tradition of storytelling is still integral to the genre of horror. Um, my dad used to tell me like horror stories when I was way too young, like entirely too young, and he would tell me these stories from El Salvador, and like we're not even talking ghost stories. Like it's not even he was telling me ghost stories. He was telling me stories of like uncles that he had that sold their soul to the devil at crossroads. And I was like 7, and he's just telling me about these dark occult rituals. My mom found out that he'd been doing that, and she got so angry because he would just tell me in kind of like secret. But I don't know, as a kid, like hearing those stories, like it did something to me because it just felt like I also come from a Catholic upbringing, like actually really Catholic. My parents are very, very religious. So, you go to you go to mass every Sunday and you hear the devil over and over again. He becomes this kind of like, yeah, he's the devil. There's God and there's the devil. And then you hear about people worshiping the devil and just something snaps in your mind. You're like, that's a thing? People can do that? Like there's something like it crawled into me that kind of like the taboo-ness of devil worship. And I was always kind of intrigued by kind of occult stories like that. Um, and I remember it carried on into like again, my parents are fairly religious, so my dad would tell me these stories, but really horror movies weren't allowed in my household. And then I remember like sleeping over at my cousin's house, and every time I would sleep over, we'd put on like a horror movie, and it was like this secret that I had from my parents, which is like I'm not allowed to watch horror movies, but here I am watching this like again super taboo thing that like it's secret and it's evil, and I get to watch it. And there was something very alluring about that, about horror as something taboo, horror as something kind of other. There's all these normal movies that I can watch, and then there's like the secret genre horror that we don't really talk about. And there was something really alluring to me about like the kind of danger of it. And then I think it clicked when I was in high school, where like my mom really wanted me to, I guess, like have a good education. So there was like a high school that was like 5 minutes away from me, but she didn't want me to go there. She wanted me to go to the Catholic high school that was like an hour and a half. So instead of going to the 5-minute high school, I had to go to the hour and a half high school out of my way. The thing about that high school was though it was very, very white, and not just white, but like white people who were fairly well off. So like very quickly, I just did not get along. I didn't fit very well in that school. Like the idea of the other, of people of color as the other was something that I realized very early in life. And again, like the idea of like you feel different and you feel you have all these like feelings you can't really express it with people because everyone else seems to get something that you don't. Everyone else seems to have the kind of normal life. Again, it reminded me a lot of horror. It was just kind of there's all the normal stuff and then there's the other. And there was something about that that I found really um I don't know, horror felt like safe to me in a way. Like it just became this kind of safe place where you watch it and it's dangerous and it's dark and it's other and like the normies at high school they won't really get it, but I get it. I get it. Um, I don't know. I found it to be this kind of safe place and I kind of just like dived in, just devouring as many horror movies as I can because now my parents couldn't stop me. So I just became like a horror nut, very kind of like around 18, 19, I was just devouring horror movie after horror movie after horror movie. And then it wasn't probably until my early 20s when I was just kind of like, yeah, I think a lot of people can. I wouldn't say it's an outsider art form, but I think a lot of outsiders find um solace in horror. And I think it was until like my mid 20s where I was just like, yeah, I love this. I should just write it. I should just do my own and kind of like, yeah, I love it too much. Yeah, so that's how I came into it.
It's
Can
awesome.
I
It does
add,
kind of crawl under your skin, right? You can't get it out.
Yeah.
can I add something? Like just something I noticed throughout all our like sharings. I just find it really interesting how juxtaposed horror is with like Catholicism because I was also raised like extremely Catholic. And while a lot of horror is viewed as taboo in these Catholic like cultures, horror is also very ingrained in a lot of our own cultures. So I feel like there's a dichotomy there that like creates a lot of interesting like I don't know, I'd say complexes in us because that's also how I got my start in horror, even though I came into it very late, only 2022, I think. Yeah, I feel like growing up with all of that, with horror being viewed as taboo, basically allowed us to create more interesting art out of it. And it's really interesting to see how that plays out between like different people, especially in this anthology. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's oh sorry, Jay, you can go.
Oh, thank you. No, I was also gonna say I absolutely connected to what Xavier was saying about like the taboo. It's um yeah, I think complexes is a good word for it. Growing up Catholic, a lot is forbidden, and that develops a fascination with the taboo that and horror creates just it. At the end of the day, it's just such a magnetic outlet for that feeling.
Yeah, I think
I
like
think you go.
yeah, I was gonna say I think I'm fully in line with Cassiopeia and Jay are saying because I think it's to the idea of Catholicism running through kind of all our backgrounds. I think Jay was saying earlier how he's tired of stories where queer people have to be perfect and like the idea of a queer character was allowed to be you know huge asshole, which he is in the story. And like I think the thing about Catholicism is it's oppressive, right? It's a very oppressive system. It's very patriarchal. It creates all these different rules, and I think horror is the opposite of that. Horror is about kind of like breaking down those barriers and kind of like wallowing in the things that you shouldn't be, wallowing in it and kind of like taking in all those the dark places. And I think, yeah, I think for people of color and I think for queer people, I think that especially lands because I think people like that in those communities know exactly what it feels like to be in the shadows, I guess, or be put to the side. So I
Well,
think,
yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
and especially people who are both people of color and queer people, which is
yeah,
why I think there's such a high density in this anthology specifically.
right.
Yeah, I think
Also,
because, sorry. You go,
yeah,
Bones.
okay. Actually, on that note, when you said that Catholicism is, well, obviously pretty oppressive, actually, one interesting experience I had growing up was like, and I think this also might be connected with, me taking the unintended perspective, because my parents were also extremely religious, and the running joke between me and my friends is that they're basically 16th century Puritans from the English countryside who have somehow been reincarnated into Filipinos. But I have always been like extremely afraid of like religious statues. And the thing is, I come from like a really religious family in the province where every May we have this thing called Flores de Mayo, which is like a parade of like different statues and then different people posing as different religious figures. And each household has their own like carriage and like a respective saint. And I was always extremely afraid of that saint. And like, I don't know, it was just like very uncanny valley type of like figure. And then you'd see all of your relatives like wiping that figure, making sure it's spotless and like buying only the best flowers for the carriage and every year buying new clothes just so, it's ready for the parade. And at the back of my house, there was an even worse religious figure, which was like a giant Jesus statue. And he was like naked and extremely bloody and life size. So, and I was like 8. And every time I had to go through the back of the house, I would see that. And he was like carrying a huge cross. And every time I would pass by that statue, I'd have to like completely avoid looking at it because it freaked me out so much. And it was such a weird experience being afraid of Jesus because like and like these all of these saints who are meant to like invoke feelings of awe and worship, but I was just terrified of them growing up.
It sounds terrifying, to be honest, and I wasn't raised religious. But I'm still terrified of all those things despite that. And I'm not sure how that works, but maybe it's that horror is the perfect home for when you have complicated feelings and thoughts and experiences that you can't share with most people because they just don't get it. And so horror is a really beautiful place to explore all of that. Yeah, statues in general, right? Like the Weeping Angels in Doctor Who were some of the best kind of creepy things. Creepy statue. Right. Does anyone in the audience, please, I don't know if you saw Liberty post questions in, if you have any in the Q&A section, because we're more than happy to answer anything. I know, Liberty, do you want to stick a question in because you had a question about choosing stories and stuff like that, and I've forgotten how you phrased that. So yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I phrased it either, but just it's such an incredible and rich collection. And you already talked a little bit about the desire to, feature authors and artists who aren't, maybe who are sort of emerging or like not already overrepresented in other collections. But I was really interested in the question of how you connected with people for this anthology. Just a little bit of a behind the curtains look at the making of such an incredible collection.
Yeah, well, this is our second time out, so I think it was a little bit easier to find people. Twitter, sadly, RIP, was fantastic at the time for both of the anthologies, for getting the word out. People were sharing it. The Kickstarter was also a great way to get people to hear about it. We are both connected to different communities, so we were just like share. And we had, I know, in the first, like we had some invited authors for both because it's a good way to get people to go, oh, we know who these authors are, we'll back the Kickstarter. So that's kind of like the starting point, is here are some authors we think would be great and aren't necessarily the ones you think of, but you might know or have heard of them in other ways and are like, oh, I'd love to see what they do in horror. So that was a good kind of starting point. But the word spread really well with the first one, and that kind of seemed to carry it on to the second one. It's important to get a good spread, but especially with the first one, because we had a little bit of a bigger budget, we were kind of like, I think we initially were like, oh, we're going to do 20 or 25 stories. I can't remember. Sloan, if you're still around, put it in the chat. But it blew out by, like, I think we added 3 or 4 more stories, maybe a little bit more than that, just because we had the budget for it and there were so many good stories. And we had to be a little bit more firmer on the word count with the second one. But it's not hard to find amazing work by people. I think that Sloan and I have quite a similar taste in what we like, and it's quite varied as well, which means we get to have a good spread of types of stories. Like we didn't have like an outline of like, oh, we need to have this many stories by this group, or naturally, as I think Jay's covered, there was a great blend of queer and trans authors already submitting, so we didn't have to go searching for that, because we would have if we needed to, but there's already so many people doing such amazing work in that area. So we just had to kind of read through, and I think you get the stories that aren't quite there yet and you can immediately kind of put them to the side, and then you get the stories that are like, this is really good, and then the stories that are like, this is really good, but it's just a little bit more. And thankfully, because we want to lift those people up who might be writing their first few stories, getting their first few publications or whatever, we could take the time and the energy to do a little bit more work with those people. So I think really we're incredibly lucky with the position that we were in, probably because we're not with a publisher. We get to make those kind of decisions and stay true to what we want to represent in the world. Sloan always has a really strong vision of what she wants, and I kind of feel like I'm a backup dancer, which is fine by me. I don't mind being the backup dancer. Sloan's phenomenal, and I'm so blessed to be able to work with her. So yeah, it almost seems like magic a lot of the time, the way that it does come together, like the right people here. I think there were only maybe 1 or 2 people who had stories in the first one that also in the second one. We tried not to double up too much, but it's kind of like you get what you get, and then you make it as shiny in the most gory, lovely way possible. It's probably one of the highlights of my writing and editing kind of, I don't know whether I call it a career, but I guess we could call it that, to work on these anthologies, because New Zealand's so tiny and I don't have a lot of access to the world, and so I get to meet all these amazing people who write these amazing stories, and work with Sloan and create these beautiful pieces of art that just, they're amazing. It did start off as a bit of a spite project. Like, we were really, really sick of seeing all the, in particular, white men on the best of horror lists. And we're like, something's got to change. And thankfully, there's been, like, it seemed like the perfect timing, because there've been a number of really amazing Indigenous or other cultured horror anthologies out in the last few years. So it's good. High time that happened.
There's so much hunger for horror from the margins over these last few years.
Yeah, that's certainly something we felt, especially with the first time we did it. It was like, oh yeah, we really want that. And then after the first one, it's like, oh yeah, we know you can do that, so let's do it again. Yeah.
Well, it's probably a little premature, so maybe it's not fair, but I will say I really hope that y'all will consider doing a 3rd volume.
Things go in threes naturally, right?
Exactly.
It's a good number.
But on that note, maybe something else that I would love to hear about from all of y'all is what you're working on next, because it sounds like many of you have some exciting projects coming up.
That was my next question, so that's perfect. There you go.
I'm preempting you.
Well, I do feel like I have quite a bit coming up, so I guess I'll start. I am currently working on a novella inspired by the essay Fascinating Fascism by Susan Sontag. I thought her thoughts about the erotic appeal of fascism were very interesting and timely. And so it's a sci-fi story set in a far future where human sacrifice powers interstellar travel. Um, but sexy, of course, because it's a story written by me. And yeah, so I'm very excited to see where that goes. I also have not one, but two stories scheduled to be published by Kaleidotrope sometime within the next year. I'm not entirely sure when, but I'm very excited about that. Um, and I guess it's not a future project, but like I said, we mentioned earlier, the anthology I edited, Dudes Rock, is currently available to purchase from Firestorm and also everywhere else, pretty much. And Xavier actually mentioned Crossroads deal stories. My own story in Dudes Rock is about a Crossroads deal. So, uh, you know, another fun little coincidence.
Gotta check that out.
Please do.
Something will sound very exciting. All right, Xavier, let us know what you're up to.
Yeah, horror is my main genre, so I'm always writing horror. So I have a few releases coming out. I have a story coming out. I have I have a pretty decent relationship with Filthy Loot, the publisher. So I've been in two or three of their anthologies. I have another one coming out in a few months, I think, which I'm really proud of. But like weirdly enough, last year, horror had been really my only genre. Last year I started writing Sword and Sorcery. Oddly enough, Sword and Sorcery is really white, and then the characters who are BIPOC are always like the villains, but like not in a cool J way, like in a very much like they're villains because they're BIPOC and written by white men. And I was just like, I love Sword and Sorcery, I love the vibe, but I'm just kind of tired of it. So I created a character. She's like a Mayan death goddess. And I made her into I wrote a story. I didn't think it was gonna get picked up. It got put up by Hex, and I was like, oh, maybe I should write more stories with her. So now I have another story with her with the same character coming out with Weird Punk Books, Profane Sorcery Volume 2 that's coming out this year. And so like I'm writing horror, but I'm also just like hammering out these sword and sorcery stories with this Mayan death goddess. And I don't know, I'm having a blast. I've never written in this genre, but I'm having so much fun.
That's phenomenal, honestly. Look, sounds so good.
I'm working on a Wuthering Heights retelling set in a haunted hacienda that basically deals with generational trauma, generational curses, and um, basically like the unfairness and the injustices caused by the hacienda system and Spanish colonialism, but also something more pertinent to this discussion. I'm also working on the novelization of my Death in the Mouth short story. Yeah, which is basically this mind-fucky historical gothic horror dealing with time loops and stuff like the ship of Theseus and like the question of identity and stuff. And I hope to get it ready soon. But yeah, that's what I've been working on lately.
It's so cool. Looking forward to hearing more about that and seeing that out in the world as well. Excellent. What about you, Bones?
Oh, yeah. I have kind of have a lot going on right now, so and like a lot of it is still in the wraps, but I can like, probably talk a bit about it. So I'm currently working with Kitty Bug Press, which is a Filipino-run risograph studio based in New York, and actually pretty relevant to what we've talked about. It talks about religion, so it's gonna be like a risograph zine, and my working title for it right now is Flesh and Ivory. So it's basically about kind of the idea of the sacred and the profane in relation to things like desire and sexuality, but kind of like turning things around. So it's about finding the sacred in the profane and finding the profane in the sacred. And I'm gonna link it back to like those experiences where the statues terrified me and what comforted me is the other. So that's one thing that's gonna come out later this year. I'm also joining the Short Box Comics Fair this year. So that one isn't gonna be horror, but it is gonna be like um about a historian and the personification of war meeting in the library at the end of the world. So I'll leave it at that for now. And then I guess the biggest project I have right now is and like the deal stuff still like happening and I haven't made any official announcements yet. But I am working on gothic horror legal drama graphic novel, which is like my own take on, because I've always been obsessed with like um thinking about gothic horror, but in like a Filipino setting. And yeah, again, with the haciendas and like colonization and like Spanish architecture and like how that's influenced like our culture and like all of that. And it's also gonna be a legal drama because I love procedurals, but I also want to criticize them in the same way that, I have my own criticisms of horror. So yeah, lots of stuff going on, and hopefully it's all gonna work out.
They all sound like amazing projects. It's very exciting times for everyone here. Yeah, super looking forward to seeing what you're up to, and when things come out, let me know. Yeah, awesome. We won't talk about what I'm up to, so it's mostly sleeping. Yeah. So I don't think we've got any questions, do we? Which is all good. That's fine. We don't need to have questions. I think we'll wrap it up now though, because it's a pretty good conclusion to our event. I want to thank everyone who came along to watch, everyone who watches in the future, Firestorm and Liberty for setting this up and having us here. You're an amazing host. We love you guys. And to Jay, Xavier, Bones, and Cassiopeia, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me and finally giving our official launch to this beautiful book. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you all have a great rest of your day if you have more day left.
Thank
So
you
much
so
for having
much.
us.
Yeah, thank you.
Having us.
Take care, folks. And everybody watching, please pick this anthology up. It is just beautifully done. You cannot tell from the screen just how lush and incredible it is. You have to hold it in your hands.
100% agree. Yeah.
Take care, folks.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Bye.